Now 5.NF.4, the fourth standard for fractions in 5th grade, it introduces multiplication of fractions. They really just want you to know how to multiply fractions, but they don't just want you to know how to multiply fractions, because in 4th grade, they introduced multiplication of fractions as repeated addition of those fractions. For the same reason that in 3rd grade, they don't introduce multiplication, they introduce addition of parts over a total, right? So in 4th grade, when they start introducing multiplication, they start using the term multiplication for what it is that we talked about in 3rd grade, so that in 5th grade, you can begin understanding the more complex manipulations of fractions for the purpose of multiplication. So let's look at this example, 2/3 times 4. Well, that's the same as saying 2/3 4 times. 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3. Well, how many thirds do you get? You end up with 2, 4, 6, 8 thirds. Now that is the 4th grade standard, recognizing fractions multiplied by a whole number, right? Now, there's a little more to it. You can really dig into that 8 thirds and start to discuss what 8 thirds actually means. You can see how if you have 8 thirds, well, you only need 3 thirds to make a whole. So how many wholes do you end up with this answer? After adding 2/3 4 times, you end up with this one whole, a second whole, with 2 thirds left over. So you end up with 2 wholes and 2 thirds of a third whole. So then the 2 and 2 thirds can actually be broken up and worked backwards back into 8 thirds. Because they're interchangeable. 8 thirds is the same as 2 and 2 thirds. And so in 4th grade, you start to look at how 2 and 2 thirds is the same as saying if each pie, for example, if all of the pies are split into 3 sections and you have 2 whole pies, then you must have 6 pieces in order to make those 2 whole pies. So this is an easy procedure to memorize for that concept, where 3 times 2 plus 2 gives you 8. But the 2 wholes means that you have 3 pieces for each of those 2 wholes. And so you do have 6 pieces, but you also have an extra 2 pieces that is not enough to make that last final whole. So 3 times 2 plus 2 is going to give you 8 thirds. And so you can change them from an improper fraction to a mixed number. I'll just write it out. An improper fraction can be changed into a mixed number and then back into an improper fraction. Now, when you start looking at 5th grade and you start looking at how 2 and 2 thirds can now be multiplied times 2, you're multiplying with mixed numbers. But in order to do that, you need to change the mixed number into an improper fraction. So 8 thirds times 2 is just the same, 8 thirds and 8 thirds. But you can also consider the 2, and this might be new, you consider this 2 as 2 over 1. 5.NF.3 asks what happens if you divide the numerator by the denominator, interpreting a fraction as division. So what's 2 divided by 1? It's 2. So if you have 2 1 wholes, then you have 2 wholes. And that's the same thing. And then if you multiply the 8 times 2 and the 3 times 1, you end up with 16 thirds. This is a shortcut that we like to use when multiplying fractions. And if you look at 8 thirds times 2 and you really break it down, doubling 8 thirds is going to end up getting you 16 thirds. So yes, it's correct either way. Now 16 thirds can also be written as 15 thirds with 1 extra, because each third, each of the 3 pieces is a whole. So that's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wholes with an extra 1/3 at the end. Now, when you start looking at problems like 2/3 times 1/2, this is where we get to the simplicity of simply knowing that you can multiply the numerators and the denominators. Alright? But when you do that, please recognize that you will need to simplify if necessary. In this case, both numerator and the denominator can be simplified to 6 can be simplified to 1/3. These are equivalent fractions, which was discussed in an earlier standard. So this idea of recognizing equivalent fractions, which actually is a 4th grade skill, comes into play in 5th grade, but is not specifically demanded in the standards. So even though it's really simple to multiply across, you have to remember to simplify when necessary. And that is 5.NF.4.